So without further ado, I'll bring up Will and Lucy. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for raising the expectations. We'll try to live up to those. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Navigating Success. My name is Lucy. I cover tech and venture capital for the Boston Business Journal. I write about startups, the big tech companies that we have in the state, the funding rounds, and the soft spots of venture capitalists. I'm here to moderate this session. I'm here to talk about, well, success, something sweet, something that we're all aim for, in a sense. And I'm here to talk specifically about, with all of you and with Will, about achieving success in startup life. We have a really good, hopefully we're gonna have a really good conversation. We're here with somebody who has done this multiple times, 6 times. I'm here with Will Grayling. He is the CEO of OVLoop, which is a company that works sort of the intersection of payments and social networks, kind of a similar to e-commerce and similar to WeChat. He's also actually has a double role. He's the CEO of Indigo Technologies, which is instead in the EV mobility space. He started numerous companies throughout his careers, and I promise you I'm gonna do my best to deep into his expertise and come up with takeaways that we can all learn from. Without further ado, before starting though, I'd like to get a sense of who is in the room. So who is a startup founder here? Well, this is Startup Boston after all. Who is actually thinking about starting their own ventures? Look at the people on the fence there. We're gonna talk. Hopefully this is gonna be helpful for you. Okay, very well. Will, before we start, is there anything about your background that you want our audience to know?
Well, other than I didn't really know that I was going to do startups until I went to graduate school. I knew that I was interested in technologies. I was an engineering undergraduate student and went on to become a nuclear submarine officer, serving about 6 years as a nuclear submarine officer for the U.S. Navy in the West Coast, and then came out here for graduate school at MIT. And as I was going through my dual degree program, which was it was called LFM at the time, engineering and business at the same time. I had a professor that asked a very simple question, and he says, "What's the difference between inventions and innovations?" And lots of hands went up, and he finally stopped us after a couple minutes, and he says, "Let me give you my simple definition." He says, innovations are simply inventions that made it into the marketplace and got mass adoption and made an impact. There are many inventions but very few innovations. It's because the chasm between the two is the valley of shadow of death. And you need a tremendous amount of passion and entrepreneurship. You need product market fit, you need capital raising, team building, execution, distribution. So all of these things along the way can kill you, but if you made it to the other side, it's a very rewarding journey. Now, it wasn't in so many words, but in retrospect, that was what I experienced. And sure enough, before I graduated, while I was finishing up my thesis, the first startup opportunity came, and I kind of jumped into it, and it's been 25 years since.
Sometimes you hear that it is really easy to have good ideas. So the world is full of good ideas, and good ideas are out there, up for grabs. But then it's really, really hard to put at least one of those good ideas into fruition, to transform into into a venture, into something that is going to work into a successful company. So we're going to talk about that particular moment. My first question for you, it's big, small, I don't know if it is, but how do you know that you are onto something?
It's, I think there's some gut sense that there's some invention that solves a problem, I think. And intuitively, you feel that, okay, there's a problem that needed to be solved, and this invention is a right match. And then from there, you're always curious, well, did somebody else already solve this problem? Am I just imagining it? And then you start diving in to do your research, and you try to understand that, is this really unique, or is there like 100 of these, and that's the latest fad? So I always go back to first principles, which is, what fundamental problems are we addressing? And what is the magic sauce? I ended up with a acronym of 4 M's that I use to determine what's worth investing my time and energy into. And similarly, for anybody who's investing as an investor, they should also look at the 4 M's. And even if you're just getting a job into a company, to say, hey, is this the right company for me to go into? What is the potential for this company? I would use these 4 M's. So this is what I learned along the way. So M number 1, what is the market? And, is it a big market? Or is it a small market? Is it local? Is it global? There's got to be a market. In other words, there's got to be a need. And if there is a market, then, and there's a need, there's got to be competition. So M number 2 is, well, what is your magic sauce? So your magic sauce in solving this big problem that the market demands has to be either technologically superior in some much greater way, not just incrementally. Or you might have distribution advantage. You might have marketing advantage. You might have IP. But usually I'm looking at technology because, a lot of times those are some of the key advantages. So for me, it was about looking for the magic sauce in a technology that can compete and be better than, or way better than, whatever's out there in the real world or in the current marketplace. Or anticipating a need that people aren't even seeing yet, right? So is there a need for a smartphone when everybody had BlackBerries and feature phones? So anticipating the market, having a magic sauce. The third M is, what is the money model? In other words, how much does it cost to build this product? How much do you have to charge? What kind of margins? What kind of upfront capital? What's the cost of acquisition? What's your margin like? Is it sustainable margin? All of these are part of the financial plan that says, what is your money model? And if your money model starts to make sense, and you think you can raise the right kind of capital to prove out the money model, and you have the magic sauce that's defensible, and you have the market, the last M is the most intangible, which is the management team. So the management team includes the founder. In fact, the most important person is the founder, because the founder has to see the vision of the first 3 M's and then go out there and convince people to join him or her in that mission. That means convincing people to invest, convincing others to join to make the product, build the product, or sell the product. So the 4th M is actually probably even more important, because you likely would have to pivot on the first 3 M's. But if you're missing any one of those M's, your probability for success is dramatic. It's not linear. It's not like, oh, you're missing 1 M and you're 25% less likely. but you're dramatic.
What do you think was the M you struggled most over the course of your career? Let me just repeat that. We have the market, the magic sauce, the money model, and the management team.
Which one do I struggle with? I think every one is a little bit different. But when the birth of a company really comes from an idea, you're building from that genesis, and the vision has to live within the founder or the founders. And that chemistry of giving birth to something very, very fragile, and to develop the 4Ms and build it to get to your first customer, to go from 0 to 1. That's what startup world is, going from 0 to 1. That is a very difficult but exciting and rewarding journey, because there's so many possibilities. And the good thing is there are unknowns that you don't know yet, but you're passionate enough to not let those future obstacles stump you from solving the current obstacles. So I wouldn't say any one M is the most important, but it's kind of all four gelling together. It's like that DNA that you're trying to form, right? Even when our parents gave birth to us, we really just started with one cell that has that DNA. But there's that source of energy, that source of emergence. I like to get a little spiritual here, because it's, you wonder how the force of life emerges. In the physics, there is this term called emergence, the opposite of which is basically saying the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that intelligence comes together and gets more intelligent when you have all these parts coming together to create something valuable. So in biology, you can see it. In physics, you can see it. So this force of emergence, I think it's within the spirit of every founder.
I really like that analogy, and it sounds like you're also telling us the grit and persistence in bringing the vision and the 4Ms to life is important. Can you tell us about how do you translate the vision and maybe the initial work you've done with the 4Ms into tangible goals?
Yeah, so initially, I think you always got to go back to the problem, which is, what problem am I trying to solve? Who's the customer? Who am I trying to help? And what is that invention that can actually solve the problem? There's almost like two things. Now, this is for me. Some people might start with the problem and then go and find the invention, find the solution, which is a great way to go about it. And then the more you get to know that domain or that first M, the more you become intelligent enough to start having inspirations of new ways of solving problems. So if you don't have the domain expertise, you're just a novice, just trying to get to understand. And in some places, especially in technology frontiers, there may not be a lot of domain expertise. And so those who forged the early days of the internet, or those who forged the early days of mobile computing and now AI or electrification or autonomy, there's a lot of experiments, and you're going, well, how is electrification and autonomy going to solve the world's transportation problems? So a lot of things have to come to play, and you have to think very, very systemically, meaning the entire system, how it works. Fortunately for me, some of that was drilled into me even early days as a submarine officer. So we have to be out there completely self-sufficient in the middle of the ocean, right? Think about us having to generate our own thermal power through nuclear power, generate our own electricity, through steam, generate our own water, make our own oxygen, scrub our own carbon dioxide because we could be under the water for 75 days. So that entire system level thinking and understanding exactly how we survive and execute our mission in that underwater vessel helps you think about system. So when I got to MIT, actually one of my favorite courses was systems dynamics, started by Jay Forrester. And that really helps you understand and think system-wise in multivariable nonlinear systems. Now, we humans are not very good at thinking about multivariable nonlinear systems. We tend to draw straight lines and extrapolate. But the world doesn't necessarily operate that way. So I'll give you an example. For many, many years, we had hundreds and hundreds of years of horse and buggy. That the mode of transportation was getting how many horses to pull your buggy, and the roads were built according to the buggy widths, and everything was revolved around that world. By 1900, the automobile has actually been in existence for a few decades. In fact, there were 3 competing standards for automobiles in 1900 against the horse and buggy. Of course, the horse and buggy is the big giant. The automobile was the startups. So these 3 things were actually electric. Believe it or not, electric vehicles existed in 1900. Steam and gasoline. But what made gasoline engines took off and the automobile took off, and between 1900 and 1920, it went from single-digit % adoption of automobiles to 95% adoption. So how come for hundreds of years and decades, you all of a sudden have this curve, and the conditions that were necessary were basically you needed the new propulsion system to be good enough. So Henry Ford's first vehicle was actually not good enough. It looks like a horse buggy with the 2-cylinder engine on the bottom. But when he developed the right engine and the right suspension and was able to produce it cost effectively enough with his assembly line, that was part of the equation. But that wasn't enough, because where's the fuel coming from? And it was the discovery of oil in Texas with the ability to refine and distribute that oil that all of a sudden go, oh my God, this is now the right condition, both necessary ingredient as well as sufficient ingredient that's ready for takeoff.
Well, let me go back for a second about to the market problem. The one of probably I don't want to say the most important M, but the one that maybe you go back more often than others when you're settling and you're working on your vision. How do you find problems? Where are the problems that are worth solving too? How do you get the inspiration, and where to look to find a good problem?
My first startup, I was still in school finishing up my thesis. Somebody had come to me with an invention. And I typically started from the invention side and then got to know the market. And then once I got to know the market, then I was able to figure out what else is needed for the market. But that's just me, okay? And I'm not saying that that's the right path to go. But for me, because I'm I'm kind of a geek myself. Somebody came to me with an invention when I was at school, and he says, "Oh, look at how quick and how thin bandwidth we can have this browser solution, and most of the compute is actually on the server side, and we have a very thin client." And this is 1999, just letting you guys know. And this is much faster than the HTML browser. So I looked at the problem and I looked at where they were trying to go, and I go, wait a minute, you know, I do think that this is really efficient and much more efficient than HTML because HTML is much heavier. However, you know, we have Internet Explorer, we have Netscape browsers. You're not going to go in. That ship has sailed. And even though the bandwidth is slow, it's going to get faster. So you're solving a problem that won't need your solution as the technology as the hockey puck moves in that direction. So I said, and that's for the fixed line internet, right? But I said, on the mobile side, however, mobile computing, that bandwidth is not going to grow very fast. So on mobile computing, this could be a great technology. And the compute power for these mobile devices, unlike a big PC, is much less. So maybe this server thin client solution would fit on a mobile. So I asked the question, can this fit? Can you work under 9600 baud over CDPD Motion Mobitex network? This is like very early days. So I challenged the technical team to see if they can experiment. And it was just a trial and error. It's cheap to be able to experiment. And sure enough, they came back to me and they said, it works great. So now I go, okay, that's an advantage. That's a differentiation. Now, who are all the people that need mobile computing? It was like Palm Pilots at that time, right? And early days of CDPD Motion Mobitex. So then I said, okay, how about these people that, you know, are delivery drivers on the go and you know, they need their routes and they need dispatching. You know, can we make it more efficient for them rather than these phone calls? So when we ask those questions, you start to unfold the problem. And that's just an example of how we eventually got to a point where we said, hey, that is the right direction. Let's build the first mobile applications. Let's empower these enterprises. Let's go out to the customer and see if they're willing to buy. So those are the sequences.
Those are the steps that you have this, right? It's almost like building a ship with Legos. So like you have the first inch, maybe you think about, well, it doesn't work as I expected, but it works in this other way. Who might need this?
Yes.
That's important. That's the sequence of questions that you have to think about while you work on the vision. Speaking of that stage, what are some common mistakes that you think can happen while you're working on and figuring out the 4 M's?
Oh, geez. I mean, the life of an entrepreneur is, you know, most people think that you succeeded in, you know, this company, this company, this company, and it's all about mistakes, but recognizing the mistakes and the failure as feedback, but not as something that defeats you. I think one of the most important things as an entrepreneur is to be able to take feedback and make adjustments, and just constantly make adjustments. I used to say that, you know, you're probably not going to get funded until your version 100 of your investor presentation, and even then, you know, still doesn't guarantee that you'll get funded. But I am constantly making adjustments, and I would say the entrepreneurs that probably, if you give up too early, or if you're not willing to make changes, that's when usually you know, things come to an end when you run out of cash. But I will say that, guys, I have stopped counting after the 19th time when I was within 1 or 2 payrolls of running out of cash. So, and it's been many more since. Okay, so just because I've had 4 startups, and all of them eventually made it from the invention stage to the innovation stage to get commercial traction and adoption. Um, it it doesn't mean that you got it all down and you stop worrying about making payroll, because we're still in this process. I'm on my 5th and 6th company at the same time right now. My last one was Samsung Pay. So we started out with an invention. Again, I like inventions. That gives us something to solve problems with. We had an invention that allows us to communicate with existing magstripe readers contactlessly. So normally you think about a credit card reader, you have to swipe a card, right? And it's not until most recently that there's RF signals that you can use Apple Pay. But before Apple Pay came, there was very few terminals that can accept contactless payments. So we invented a technology, and we said, hey, in order for mobile phones to turn into wallets, we need those terminals to be able to communicate with us. So my co-founder, brilliant guy, knew about magstripe readers, and he figured out using the laws of physics to be able to generate current through a loop of wire to give you a magnetic signal. And if you flip the current around, magnetic signal flips. And if you flip the current back and forth, the magnetic signal simulates what's on a magstripe. So you can actually tap and pay with an existing POS. So we knew that nobody was going to believe us, and this ultimately belongs into a mobile wallet. So what do? Instead of selling the technology, and trying to eventually get it into the mobile phones, we had to just build our own version into a dongle and a little backpack to a phone and simulate and show people how this could be done. So we built our own wallet. We built our own little devices. And then when Apple Pay came out, we were trying to sell ourselves into Apple. But Apple had already made the decision to go NFC. So we have this new technology that we wanted to get into phones. But we had a lot more acceptance than they did, because there were very few terminals that can accept Apple Pay. And ours worked at 94% of existing POS. So we ended up we just said, we're going to prove it out to everybody. We built our own application. We did our own marketing. We did our own solution. And we turned out to be the #1 rated mobile wallet against Apple Pay, Google Pay, at that time, SoftCard, and we were selling into Samsung. So, and we had to convince Samsung to adopt our technology. And good news is Samsung was trying to catch up to Apple. So they decided to not only invest in us, but before they invested in us, I had to solve the chicken and the egg problem. I'm just going to use this as an example of what we went through. So basically, Samsung says, well, that's great technology. That's cool. It works. But is Visa going to adopt this? Because if Visa doesn't adopt this and doesn't allow you to do this, then, we're not going to adopt you. And so we went to Visa, and Visa goes, well, is Samsung going to adopt you? So I got this chicken and the egg problem, right? So I said, well, how do I solve this? So the only way for me to think about how to solve this is I got both of them laddered up that says the other guy is going to invest in us. And then when I got them lathered up enough, I scheduled this one critical meeting with the CEO of Visa and said, I'm bringing Samsung with me. Can you meet with us? And we set up this meeting, and in that 45 minutes, we were able to say both of them were going to invest in us, and we're going to move forward. So these are critical moments. And then ultimately, of course, when Samsung decided to acquire us and embed us into every smartphone from the Galaxy S6 forward, so we got embedded into billions of smartphones. They made me the global co-GM of Samsung Pay to help launch Samsung Pay to compete against Apple Pay. And so I spent 3 years doing that, but I told the Samsung chairman that hey, ultimately true mobile wallet cannot be tied to my Samsung phone or my iPhone or my Google Pixel phone, or it can't be fragmented, siloed. Our wallet should belong to the individual. God forbid I switch, phone systems. So what I was trying to share with the Samsung chairman was, hey, you should really build a universal digital wallet, much like what China has done with WeChat, WeChat Pay, and it needs to be for commerce, not just for payments, but for communications, for rewards, loyalty, engagement, coupons, all of these things. And now, I wanted to build that in Samsung, but of course, the question Samsung comes back to me was, how do we sell more Samsung phones?
Kind of a fair question.
It's fair. It's totally fair for Samsung. So after I finished my 3-year commitment, I came out and I decided to build this. So now in that case, I've had domain experience. I can see the missing link. I knew that there was a market, but that's a heck of a hard market to go after, right? But I have the foundation. And I was able to license this technology back from Samsung, and I acquired some other companies. So now we've been building this infrastructure to try to solve one of the hardest problems to solve, which is create a universal digital wallet and a digital mall inside of your wallet for everybody to close the loop between the buyers, the sellers, the manufacturers, and the brands, and the influencers. They should all have a unified community, digital community. It's omni-channel. So that's exactly what I'm embarking upon right now. We're finally getting to beta with OV Loop. And now I'm out there talking to the major retailers. I'm talking to brands. And there's still a lot of work that has to be done. But
Well, right before, you said something interesting. You mentioned your co-founder. So I'm curious to ask you if you can explain to us what are some of the positive team dynamics that you've had with your co-founder. It is more common that startups are born with at least a team of two. It's although solo founders are not uncommon. So tell us a little bit about the positive team dynamics between co-founders and how to foster those.
yeah, so what I look for is somebody that can complement me in a very positive way. So for me, I'm technologically savvy enough, and I can connect the dots of where technology can fit. I used to code, but asking me to code is not the best use of time, and you probably don't want me to be spending time coding and debugging. So I look for people that are much better than me in the technology side, whether it's the hard tech of this magnetic invention. They have the domain knowledge to be able to solve a very strong technical problem. And the problem that I have to solve is, how does this technology fit into the market, and how do we take this invention and then turn it into innovation? So my job is all this dirty stuff in between of figuring out how we're going to raise capital, even if it's the last minute. I talked about how many times, we come within inches of running out of payroll. I'm the guy that has to make sure that there's enough fuel. The chief executive officer is normally what people say. I'm the chief, earnings officer, to make sure that there's enough fuel in the tank so you can make it to the next step. So if we can complement each other, where I'm looking at the market, I'm pivoting, I'm talking to customers, and my co-founder at this side, our chief technology officer, my current CTO at OV Loop, is somebody that I work with, since MIT. So he's worrying about the code, he's worrying about the servers and the uptime, and so between the two of us, we can actually deliver value and get the feedback, and then we inch by inch go from 0 to 1.
Well, sometimes making sure that there's always fuel in the tank means talking to investors, with investors, having them involved. Tell us a little bit about the very beginning of those relationships and how do you spot the good vibes from investors and how ultimately you decide to partner with them.
Yeah, that's another ball game. I was very fortunate to have some good angel investors that have helped me, and then some semi-later stage investors that trusted me enough to save me multiple times. Right? And so my first investor was actually a mentor out of MIT, and his name was Frank Ferguson, and God bless him. The gentleman invested in every one of my startups, with the exception of my latest one, because he actually passed away during COVID. God bless him. And he was an incredible supporter. And building that relationship and that trust, I think, is a foundational element. So much of this is about relationships. And I think we as startup founders, I'm driven by passion, and it's taken me a while to understand the importance of relationships. And I want to stress this to all of you, in that the relationships in your lives are foundationally important, from not just your relationship with your co-founder or your CTO or your head of sales or whatever. Your team members is one part of your relationship, and trying to understand their strengths and weaknesses, trying to have compassion and having them focus on what they're good at, and when you focus on what you're good at, that's all. There's a lot of blocking and tackling, but your relationship with your investors are equally as important, because they supply the fuel. And so your integrity is very important. Your integrity with your team, your integrity with your investors, because you can fool some of the people some of the time, but if you don't have that integrity, it will eventually show up, and investors can smell it. And because I'm running so hard, sometimes some of my failures is not spending enough time with some of my investors, because I only have so much time. So some investors will feel neglected, especially as the round gets bigger and you have more and more investors that are at play. So it spreads your time. It's just like your team getting bigger; it spreads your time. But your customers, it's the same thing. You have to build that trust, and you have to continue to look at these relationships. So that means you have to be quiet enough sometimes to think about all the people that are there to help make the company successful. Now, don't forget your family, because I've neglected my family at times, but I also recognize how important my family is, and I made some of those mistakes. So, like I said, as an entrepreneur, your job is to make mistakes, but the question is how quickly can you recover from those mistakes, so that you sacrifice less. You're going to sacrifice. There's just no getting around it. You're going to sacrifice. But how do you sacrifice less, and how do you go back to those relationships to make sure that your team trusts you, your investors trust you, your customers trust you, and most importantly, your family trusts you and understand you. And when those pieces starts to fall, just like the 4 M's, when any piece is missing, you're going to have a systemic issue that shows up sooner or later.
I see. Well, this is sounds like you you said that maybe you didn't spend enough time with your family as much as you would have liked during this journey. But I don't want to drill too much on that. But tell us a little bit about what you would have done differently over the course of your career.
Yeah. So this balance is really tricky because you have to be able to work 100-hour weeks, and at the same time, spend time on those critical moments with your kids. Bring your spouse along for the journey. I think one of my mistakes in some of my early, and God bless my wife. I mean, this is truly. She's been through a lot of thick and thin with me, but there definitely were times when I was so caught up that I didn't involve her in the journey, and we didn't kind of share the problems. So I tend to come home and I don't want to talk about work, and I neglect to have that communication. And how can she share my burden, and how do I share her burden? And it's interesting, and it's taken me a lot of years to go through some ups and downs in our relationship to recognize that we have to share each other's burdens, and we have to openly communicate our needs, because there's absolutely needs on both sides of the relationship that if we don't have a honest and an elegant way of communicating our needs, instead of blaming and pointing fingers and backing into our shells, which we normally, we're human beings. When we're tired, when we're frustrated, it's easy to back into our shell. So I can't stress enough how important the psychology of communications, how important that is to develop as an entrepreneur. Because I didn't have that when I was early days. I was brute forcing a lot of things. And fortunately, there was enough love to be able to get past a lot of that. But as I am getting a little bit more mature over time, what I do recognize is that when I can properly communicate my needs and desires without accusation, because all of us are capable of that. And it's not just with our spouse. Clearly with your employees, you can scream and pound the table, or you can express it in a way that gets your point across in a very direct way without sounding accusatory. It says, hey, this is what I observed. This is how I feel about this. And this is what I feel we need. And what do you think? And that simple step of communicating, it wasn't really taught to me in high school, college, or even grad school. None of that was communicated. And and it took some conflicts and issues and even counseling to be able to realize that, oh my God, I'm just, it could be easily solved with a simple way of prefacing how we communicate our needs, and allowing the other person to also communicate their needs, and then openly discuss what is the solution. So that's one of my takeaways.
As you said, I think that this could be really a good mindset to have, not just with your spouse or your significant others, but also with all the people in your personal and professional relationships. I think we are close to the 45 minutes mark, so it is, I think, time to call your attention again and ask for a few questions for Will. Yes, please.
Hi, Will. Thanks for taking some time. I'm Chris, and I've been part of the retail and brand landscape for a while on both the analytics side and on the brand and even the retail side. I'm curious how an OV loop, how are you thinking through what I see most of the effort going towards, at least in the big box, is these large advertising, proprietary advertising platforms with their immense amount of consumer data that they want to monetize. That seems to be where all of the efforts are today, at the expense of just day-to-day operating analytics. Is your new product, touching on that?
Yeah, we are looking at solving the problem in a much more holistic way, and the reason we call it OV Loop is we really want to close the loop between the buyer's wallet and the seller's point of sale, but recognizing that that's only at the last step of the transaction, but we want to get to before the transaction. In terms of engagement, the influencers that get you to get awareness of the product. And then after the transaction, in other words, what does the customer service look like? And how does the consumer reach back to the retailer as well as the brand? And the more I look at how we're structuring and architecting the solution, is that we have to get not only the retailer, which has the end product, whether it's Amazon, Walmart, Target, they have the end distribution to you, right? They're the end point. However, look at all the brands that need to be there, whether it's from Coca-Cola to Anheuser-Busch, Procter & Gamble, and how do they advertise? They advertise through influencers. And even if you're a small product, proprietary product, you're advertising through influencers. But the problem is these brands don't have a relationship with the consumer. After their advertising, they just know that how much product was sold through Walmart or Amazon or something, and they don't know who Will Graylin is that bought the product. And the influencers, they might influence you, but they don't know what you bought and whether there's attribution to exactly what they sold. Even influencers like Joe Rogan's podcast, or this celebrity, or the NFL. These are just ways of getting eyeballs. But if we can close the loop between the eyeballs and the influencers, so in other words, Will Graylin bought product X because of influencer Y, and when I closed that transaction, because I was incentivized with a coupon from product X, and I bought it at location Z, retailer Z. When I closed that transaction, if the influencers know that I bought it, and I chose to have that influencer in my wallet and in my mall, and I chose that brand and I chose that retailer, now in one transaction, I've closed 3 loops. And then each one of these loops should be able to interact with me rather than go through an intermediator that's selling ads. Because for Web 1 and Web 2, what they do is they basically said, hey, we'll give you something for free. We'll get your eyeballs, and we're going to disintermediate everybody else, and we're going to sell ads. Well, that model for Web 1 and Web 2 does not close the loop between the buyers, the sellers, and the influencers and the brands. So we want to change that. And we basically want to say, our wallets belong to us. This is our property, just like, you go to a new real estate, you buy a house, you have the keys. That's your property. Our wallet should be our property, rather than today you've got PayPal, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay. They own our data. Facebook owns our data, PayPal owns our data, and they're lock it with one key. Versus the Web3 world, where we own our own key, we own the wallet, and we give permission to who we want to be in our loop, whether it's a retailer, an influencer, or a brand. So that is the vision of where we see Web3 should go to. And so as I think about how I can make an impact and bring value, it's my unique experience in the POS space, which 2 of my companies were sold to the 2 largest POS companies. The wallet space, one of my companies was sold to one of the largest wallets. and how do we integrate and close the loop between those two? So that unique experience, and it took me 20 some odd years to get to this point, helps me formulate this new architecture as we march towards Web3. So is it hard? Of course it is. But if we can just get the early adopters to join in this loop, then it becomes a natural reinforcing feedback that says, I have an anchor tenant, just like I have Macy's in this mall, right? That's my anchor tenant. And I'm gonna get all these, the rest of the shops to come in, to join the mall, and now, the community mall starts to become real viable. And that's exactly what we need to do with this OV Loop super app. We call it a super app platform. So yes, there's a lot that still has to happen, and we are trying to bypass the necessities of the current fragmented infrastructure and move towards more unified commerce infrastructure.
I think the gentleman in the white shirt had a question for Will.
Check 1, 2. Awesome. Will, first of all, thank you so much for this. I had a question that might be from your early startup days, but I want to give it a shot. I'm on my third company right now. First two had a lot of learnings. One of the things that always frustrates me so much is the compliance, and I'm using that as such a broad term. I'm talking letters of good standing in this state, applying as a foreign LLC in another state, registering for unemployment insurance, and even industry-specific compliance is such a nightmare for any industry, in my opinion. I just wanted to ask you, from the perspective of someone who's bootstrapping a startup, trying to get all your ducks in a row, do you have any advice on, good ways to go about that, or even, risk management comes into play there, in my opinion, because it's just like, it's almost impossible, to follow every rule, law, and regulation. Thank you so much. Let me know if you need me to clarify any of that.
No, I think I understand your question, and maybe the question behind the question is, you have very limited resources, and every space you go into, there's got to be some level of regulations and compliance. And I would say, as a startup, just focus on delivering value. Don't worry about the compliance side so much. By the time you need to get to market, for example, in the payment space, you have to, follow PCI certification. Otherwise, you don't even get to do that. But in the early days, for us to prove our wallet efficacy, we just went and did it. And we just created the new experience. We weren't big enough for anybody to come and knock on our doors. So, and sometimes you do have to think about how to prevent fraud or safety issues. Otherwise, you may get to a point where you self-destruct and say, well, that's not safe, and we're not going to adopt your solution. So it's always a compromise, but always focus on the customer first. And then as you get bigger, you'll have more resources to patch up those holes. And I'll give you an example. I'm in the EV world right now, working on our next generation EV, an invention out of MIT that has these robotic smart wheels for Indigo Technologies. And it's awesome, right, to be able to create a new class of vehicle. So talk about compliance issues and security and NHTSA standards, and but right now we're just trying to make it work. Just focus on getting it working, making the unit economics, because we're not selling yet. And even when you're selling, I was a big fan of Tesla, early days. I was one of the earliest adopters here in New England for Tesla Model S. And I remember, I was driving on the freeway. They didn't even have a place to deliver my Model S, right? So I remember sitting in a room in Watertown as they were trying to figure out how to deliver the first Model S to me. And I was sitting there with Danny Ainge. It was the two of us wondering, okay, what are they going to do to deliver our cars? But as I'm driving on the freeway, all the screens blacked out. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, I'm still driving, but I see nothing. Everything's black. I had to pull over to the side of the road. I called customer service. and they say, okay, hold down these two buttons and that one simultaneously for 5 seconds and reboot the, but that's the risk that Elon was willing to take to get the product out. And that's a very big example, but most of us have much smaller examples. And so just don't worry about all the minutia. Focus on the value creation.
I want to get at least one more question here from the first row.
Building a business, how do you juggle or manage the tension? Sorry. As you're building a business, how do you manage the tension between time to market, feature velocity versus quality? Because there is a tension between those.
There is definitely a tension. There's definitely a group of folks that want feature creep, but at the same time, the real question is just think about what MVP means. What is minimum viable product, and get it out there so that, and if it's less than minimum, you'll find out very quickly. If it's more than minimum, you are wasting resources and time. So it is a tension, it's a balance, but,
And the risk is reputation damage potentially. If your product falls short of what the market wants or expects, you potentially lose some credibility in the marketplace.
yeah, again, I think error on the side of boldness is my recommendation, in that you're a startup. People will forgive you, just like I forgave Elon Musk for software that was still shoddy. But yeah, I think just err on the side of boldness so that you can get as much feedback as you can.
Thank you.
I think we can make a space for at least one more. Otherwise, I will proceed to
Lucy, I'll
close.
give you one more. This was a great session.
Yes.
Really,
Thank
lots
you.
of insight. Will, that was wonderful. Your questions are always poignant, and appreciate you both. From virtual, somebody was saying they're looking for build something very big. It's going to take multiple financing rounds, and they haven't accepted investment yet. What should they focus on so that they can keep control on that journey?
Okay. Is the question maintaining control and the integrity of your vision, which, by the way, is it's a very real thing. So I've gone through this multiple times, and I've had my battle scars also, in that I have given up control to venture investors at one point where that conflict and the tension between what venture wanted from what they think is a investment, return on investment, versus what the founder wanted to do. There's always that tension. And sometimes they're right. But at the same time, to go from 0 to 1 and successfully march forward, usually follow your gut, and if you have those early conversations with investors, as I mentioned earlier, before the tension gets started, hopefully you could avoid some of the tension from building up. But you need capital in order to grow. So if this particular individual is looking at a multi-stage, capital-intensive type of financing, I would say if there's no way by the time you get to your product launch, if you think that you're going to need series, BCD, and there's no way that you're going to maintain absolute control, then then just figure out how you hit the next milestone before you raise the next round, so you minimize the dilution in each round, which is what I've learned to do along the way. It's not always going to work out the way that you want it, but you try to hit that next milestone. Your next milestone gets the investors for the next round excited. But I would say it's always tricky. I'm going through that right now with a very capital-intensive business, which is trying to build not only a smart wheel, but also a smart EV and a smart mobility service at the same time. I know that there's still going to be multiple rounds coming, and that I won't be in control by the time we hit. I'm still in control now, but I won't be in control in the next 2 rounds, after the next 2 rounds. So the key question is, how do I gain enough momentum and credibility to show investors that I'm the guy that should be behind the wheels, to get from 0 to 1, and then from 1 to 10. And maybe I'm not the guy to go from 10 to 100, right? So, and I got to be smart enough to recognize that. But I do know that I have to be the guy to get from 0 to 1 and 1 to 10. So try to create as much value as possible with the resources that you have, and demonstrate that value, then raise the next round. Keep building those relationships with your investors, and then take it one step at a time.
Great answer. Great answer. And Will, you're the guy. So for those of you, thank you both, that are going to be sticking around. The next session is about raising your first round. The nitty-gritty of it, sponsored by Foley. And that's the journey that, if you want to know more details, stick around in this room.